So the events of what we've just seen in terms of this combat search and rescue mission, which was launched to go after the two airmen in the F-15E Strike Eagle, was remarkable, and it was remarkable given the depth that the aircraft was brought down inside Iran. You're looking at about 350 to 400 kilometers near Isfahan, but you're also having to deal with a significant Iranian threat, which comprises Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the Baji forces. Baji forces are effectively a militia force, but they have significant numbers, about 200,000 estimated, but can go up to 1 million in a wartime footing. So you've got a significant amount of loyal people on the ground that are going after and trying to hunt this airman down. But you've also got capability that the IRGC are going to be putting into that area. So they're going to be putting in vehicles, dogs, drones. They're going to have troops. Those troops will likely have what's called man-portable air defense systems. That's a shoulder-launched missile which has what's called an infrared seeker. And that basically goes after the hot part of any aircraft, which is usually the engine. And obviously helicopters and fast jets and air transport aircraft all have hot parts. So the threat on this was significant. Now, when something like this happens, let's start off with where the ejection occurs. So an ejection is a brutal process. And what do I mean by that? I mean that you've got an aircraft that has two ejection seats in it, and the pilot and the rear crew, who's called a weapons systems officer or weapons systems operator, or WISO, they'll be punched out of the cockpit at about 25 Gs. What that means is that your body weighs 25 times heavier than what it normally does in that situation. So if you're going through an ejection, and I personally have never ejected, but I've flown on ejection seats before, there's a handle in between your legs, which you can pull, and some of the American systems have handles up here, which you pull. What that will do is it'll start initiating a whole sequence. So the canopy will be blown off, obviously, so they don't fly through it. And then the seat will leave the aircraft at about 25 G. What you've also got to remember as well is that this aircraft is flying probably greater than 300 miles an hour, maybe 420 miles an hour. So that's a significant airflow. If the aircraft has been shot and it's no longer flyable, the sort of the flight envelope at which the ejection can occur can also compound the situation of the airman. So now we've got the airman out of the aircraft. The seat will separate automatically if the airmen are below 10,000 feet. That will separate automatically. So if they survive the ejection and they've got out of the aircraft and they survive the missile strike, now they've got to survive the landing. And because of the geolocation of where the forward operating base was, we know that the terrain of which certainly the weapons system operator was hiding in was quite mountainous. That's a big problem, because if you're landing on mountainous terrain, that can sprain ankles, break limbs, and the whole thing that happens next, which is called the escape and evasion, that's the next phase of surviving the ejection, and obviously to escape and evade rapidly. And what that means is putting as much distance between where you landed and where you need to go and isolate yourself. Your question on what happens when they land and they're in this sort of high threat environment, the adrenaline really kicks in, and hopefully the training will kick in. So as soon as their feet touch the ground, they'll be looking to get rid of kit, the parachute, try and conceal it somewhere if indeed the ground allows them to conceal it. And then, as I mentioned, putting distance between where they've landed and where they need to go and basically get under cover, and we call it get to ground. If it's daytime, you want to get to ground as quick as possible, and you're taught to move at night, and obviously taught to move at night to remain inconspicuous, and it's much harder to see you at night. Now, that said, the IRGC will no doubt have thermal camera capability, so they can spot hot sources and people moving at night. But that's the critical thing. And the other critical thing is that as soon as you land, inside their flying vessel have what's called a PR-122 beacon. So it's like a radio with a beacon on it. That will have to be turned on. As soon as that emits a ping, then the combat search and rescue forces can get an identifier on where they are and then start getting the mission launched. Now, combat search and rescue, this is a significant amount of capability. So for the rescue of the first airman, which was within the first 12 hours, that was the pilot who's the front seater in the F-15E Strike Eagle, there were a few assets that were launched. There was what's called an HC-130J Hercules. That's an air transport aircraft, but it's been specifically fitted out for combat search and rescue missions. Then trailing behind that, and there is video footage of seeing the HC-130J refueling to what are called HH-60 Jolly Green 2 helicopters. Again, it's a derivative of a Black Hawk, but it's specifically designed for these type of missions. So additionally, it's got a refueling pod. Traditional Black Hawks don't. It's got things like terrain following radar. So the US have set up this forward operating base, and they've flown two HC-130Js. They've now flown two of these aircraft around 350 to 400 kilometers deep inside Iran, high threat territory. They've landed them at a forward operating base. And inside one of these C-130s, or maybe both, but we know certainly one, are what's called MH-6 Little Bird helicopters. These are the helicopter of choice, the light helicopter of choice for US Special Forces, Delta Force. And so for the extraction of the second airman, the US are now throwing a significant amount of capability of this. Two HC-130Js, you've got MH-6, and you've got Delta Force, and there are a lot of troops on the ground here. The reason they've been put in is because they know the Iranian threat is bearing down, and we know from open source intelligence that the Iranian forces got within 3 kilometers of the downed weapon system operator. The other problem now, and this, you can see how complicated this is, this picture builds. The other problem now is that the weapon system operator has gone for elevation when he's landed. He's gone for elevation. The reason he's gone for elevation, i.e. walking up a mountain, is so he can get that beacon on, and that improves and increases the beacon's range, which obviously helps with identification. But he was stuck in a ravine. So when you're putting the beacon on in that ravine, its range is going to be rapidly diminished. This is where the CIA comes in, the Central Intelligence Agency. They've got two jobs at the moment. One, they're putting out a misinformation campaign, spreading the word in Iran that the weapons system operator has been found. The second one is that the Central Intelligence Agency have specific capability outside of the beacon to geolocate the weapons system operator, which they did. Pass that information on to the Pentagon, who passed it back on to the Special Forces crews that had landed at that forward operating base. So this is all happening at night. They get the weapons system operator, and now they're going into extraction mode, or exfil mode, as we call it in the military, exfiltration. What that means now is that all of those forces that have gone in to assist with the recovery of the weapons system operator, they're now exfiltrating back to that forward operating base. However, the two transport aircraft, the HC-130Js, are stuck. And this is all on open source intelligence. So because they're stuck, the US now have to launch an additional 3 HC-130J aircraft to go in and land at that forward operating base, likely with their engines running, because they don't want the same situation to occur. They then pull out all of the special forces operators that have been put in the initial two. Those 3 aircraft now exfiltrate back over the border outside of Iran. And then what the US do is they get US jets to put precision guided munitions onto those 2 HC-130J Hercules aircraft, basically to destroy them. Those aircraft have a lot of very sensitive equipment capability on them. And so the last thing the US want are those aircraft and the MH-6 helicopters getting into the hands of the Iranians. So that's kind of a very sort of broad but very quick run through of how open source intelligence reporting is suggesting that this went down. Yes, the Americans were throwing a lot of capability at it, but the Iranians just would have flooded more in, especially these man-pads, these man-portable air defense surface-to-air missiles. They're really hard to track. They're really hard to take out because they're basically on soldiers. And they can be an absolute nightmare for aviation assets that are trying to locate a downed airman in this scenario. So it really was this extraction and exfiltration of this weapon system operator really was on the outer limits of what success might look like. So an absolute remarkable operation, given just how deep into Iran it was.